There are discoveries that change the world, and then there are discoveries that disappear before the world ever gets the chance to understand them. Across different countries, different decades, and completely unrelated fields, the same pattern keeps repeating itself. A scientist makes a breakthrough that challenges reality itself, and shortly after, they vanish. No explanation, no evidence, just silence. Their work is erased, their names quietly removed, and their ideas buried so deeply that most people never even realized they existed. So what exactly did they discover? And who decided that we were never supposed to know? Let's begin with the first case. A man who may have broken the most fundamental law of the universe. Top 1. The light speed breaker. In 1997, deep beneath the Apennine Mountains of Italy, inside the Gran Sasso National Laboratory, a little-known theoretical physicist named Dr. Emil Varga was assigned what seemed like a routine task. Officially, it was a minor timing calibration experiment connected to long baseline neutrino detection. It wasn't the kind of work that attracts attention. In fact, most senior researchers barely considered it important. But what Varga discovered during one late-night session would quietly become one of the most unsettling anomalies ever recorded inside a European physics facility. His task was simple in theory: measure the arrival time of neutrinos traveling across a fixed distance using atomic clocks calibrated through laser ranging systems. It was precise, controlled, and well understood. But then something appeared in the data that made no physical sense. A cluster of neutrinos seemed to arrive earlier than light itself would have over the same distance. At first, the result was dismissed as an error. Instrument drift, calibration issues, something explainable. But Varga didn't ignore it. He recalibrated the clocks. He replaced fiber optic cables. He repeated the experiment again and again under tighter conditions, each time expecting the anomaly to disappear. But it didn't. The difference was small, measured in nanoseconds. But it was consistent. According to modern physics, nothing can exceed the speed of light. It is not just a guideline, it is the limit that holds causality together. If even one particle could travel faster than light, then cause and effect would no longer be fixed. Time itself would become unstable at a fundamental level. Varga understood exactly what that meant, and instead of publishing his findings, he chose to stay silent. He documented everything carefully in private notes, but avoided official academic channels. Instead, he requested additional experimental time and greater isolation from the main research team, almost as if he knew what would happen next. 3 days after his final recorded entry, at exactly 3:42 in the morning, security logs confirmed that Varga entered the laboratory. Surveillance cameras captured him walking into the underground corridor, carrying a metal briefcase. But there was no footage of him ever leaving. Later that same day, external personnel arrived at the facility. They were not listed as university staff, not registered as contractors. Technicians reported that sensitive equipment had been removed from Varga's workspace, including the modified spectrometer and timing hardware. His computer drives were confiscated. His office was sealed under a containment notice citing procedural violations, but no explanation was ever given. Weeks later, an official statement claimed that Dr. Varga had suffered from psychological stress and had taken an extended leave from research. No hospital records were produced. No travel documentation was found, and his family was advised not to pursue further questions. Years later, fragments of a timing protocol nearly identical to Varga's design appeared in a classified defense patent, filed without attribution. The original research data has never been recovered. So here's the question. Did Varga really observe particles traveling faster than light? Or did he discover something that reality itself was not meant to reveal? Top 2. The consciousness camera. In the summer of 2008, at a private neuroscience conference in Kyoto, Japan, an engineer named Takashi Morimoto introduced a device he simply called the field lens. It was not part of the official conference schedule. There were no cameras, no press, and no large audience waiting for a breakthrough. The demonstration took place in a small side room under dim lighting, with only a handful of people present. But for those who were there, what happened that night stayed with them long after the conference ended. According to the surviving accounts, Morimoto claimed that his device could capture what he described as conscious energy fields, a statement that instantly pushed his work into dangerous territory somewhere between neuroscience, quantum theory, and metaphysics. Morimoto placed the device in front of a volunteer's forehead and dimmed the lights. After a brief delay, an image began forming on a connected projection screen. It was not a thermal scan. It was not an MRI overlay. It was not a digital simulation. What appeared was something far stranger, a swirling, translucent shape hovering just above the subject's skin, like a cloud of colorless flame suspended in the air. Witnesses said the image shifted with the subject's breathing and changed in response to emotional stimuli. Then the demonstration became even more unsettling. When a second subject entered the room in an agitated emotional state, the shape immediately sharpened and pulsed, as if the device was not merely recording a signal, but capturing something reactive and alive. At that point, the room reportedly fell silent. The implication was no longer just unusual imaging, it was interaction. The field lens allegedly relied on a combination of near-infrared spectroscopy, low-frequency electromagnetic pulses, and a proprietary sensor grid that Morimoto refused to patent. According to the few notes that survived, his theory was built around the idea that the brain produced quantum echo patterns, extending beyond the skull into a reactive spatial envelope. In other words, he believed consciousness was not completely confined to the body and could, under the right conditions, be visually recorded. That claim alone was enough to make the scientific community recoil. If he was right, it would not just alter neuroscience. It would challenge the meaning of identity itself. Where does the mind end? What part of a human being exists beyond flesh, bone, and measurable brain activity? And if something outside the body can be seen, then what else might eventually be measured or manipulated? The backlash came fast. Conference attendees publicly distanced themselves from the demonstration, calling it irresponsible and unscientific. Morimoto's research assistant was reportedly fired from his university position. Within weeks, the small research facility Morimoto operated on the outskirts of Osaka was shut down. Local reports claimed the building had been purchased by an unnamed corporate buyer and repurposed for data security testing. Every piece of equipment inside was removed overnight. By the end of the year, Morimoto himself had vanished from public view. He was never formally declared missing, but no interviews, no research, and no appearances ever followed. His phone lines were disconnected. His addresses were shuttered. His personal website disappeared. Years later, a grainy image supposedly taken during that demonstration surfaced online, but no one could verify whether it was authentic, and that uncertainty only deepened the mystery. So what really happened in that room in Kyoto? Did Morimoto create the first machine capable of imaging something beyond the brain? Did he accidentally reveal that consciousness extends outside the body, into a space science has never wanted to seriously acknowledge? Or was the real danger not that people would laugh at his invention, but that they might believe it? Because if the mind is not fully contained within us, then the boundary between thought and reality becomes far thinner than we have ever been told. And if Morimoto truly captured that boundary on screen, then perhaps disbelief was never the reason he disappeared. Perhaps it was fear. Top 3, the fifth dimension mathematician. In 2003, during a closed-door session at the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, Italy, a rising German mathematician named Dr. Ulrich Noberg presented a paper that was never meant for the public. The document carried a title that sounded abstract at first glance, Topological Bridges Beyond Four-Space. But what Noberg described inside that paper was anything but abstract. He proposed a framework for interacting with a fifth spatial dimension, not as a theoretical construct like in string theory, but as something that could be accessed and manipulated under controlled conditions. Unlike conventional models that treat higher dimensions as hidden and compact, Noberg's approach suggested that the fifth dimension was folded into our reality in a way that could be punctured. He described it as a layer of space that already influenced quantum behavior, but remained inaccessible due to the lack of proper interaction mechanisms. His theory introduced the idea that with high-frequency torsion fields and a specially engineered crystalline lattice, it might be possible to create what he called a microportal, a temporary rupture in the geometry of space itself. The audience, composed of physicists and mathematicians from some of the most respected institutions in the world, reacted with a mixture of skepticism and unease. There were no physical prototypes, no demonstrations, only equations. But those equations were described by one anonymous attendee as too elegant to dismiss. That was the unsettling part. It didn't feel like speculation. It felt like something dangerously close to being real. Within weeks of that presentation, Nobour began receiving attention. Private invitations arrived from military research branches and high-level think tanks. They wanted access to his work. They wanted to explore its potential, but Nobour refused all of them. Instead of stepping further into the spotlight, he withdrew. He returned to his countryside home in Saxony and cut off communication entirely. Emails went unanswered. Phone calls were ignored. His university profile was deleted without explanation. His personal website, once filled with research notes, was reduced to a blank white page containing a single line of text. Topology can collapse from within. Then in February 2004, something strange was noticed. A neighbor reported that the windows of Nobour's home had been covered in reflective foil. No smoke came from the chimney, despite freezing temperatures. Concerned authorities were called to perform a welfare check. When police entered the house, they found it completely empty. There were no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone had left in a hurry. But everything inside was gone. Furniture removed, equipment missing. The basement, where Nobour was believed to conduct his private experiments, had been stripped down to bare concrete. Only one thing remained. On the floor, etched directly into the surface using what appeared to be a soldering tool, was a sheet of equations. Equations that have never been fully solved. No missing person report was ever formally filed. No investigation followed. And just like that, Nobour disappeared from both the academic world and the public record. Years later, a patent filed by an untraceable holding company in Luxembourg revealed a design that closely resembled Nobour's proposed lattice structure. It referenced concepts like nonlinear distance compression and transspatial resonance. The application was quietly withdrawn without explanation. So what exactly did Nobour discover? Was it just a mathematical theory that frightened the wrong people? Or did he actually find a way to open a doorway into another dimension? Because if even a small part of his work was correct, then space itself is not fixed. It is flexible. It can be pierced, folded, and reshaped. And if that is true, then maybe Nobour didn't disappear. Maybe he went somewhere no one else knows how to follow. Top 4, the magnetic field engineer. In 1984, in a quiet industrial suburb of Toronto, an electrical engineer named Martin Kessler unveiled a device that, if real, should not have been possible. He described it as a closed-loop magnetic induction engine capable of producing continuous rotational force without any external fuel source. It wasn't presented in a major conference or backed by a large institution. Instead, the demonstration took place inside a rented warehouse, attended by a small group of independent inventors, one skeptical journalist, and a local science television crew. At the center of the room stood the machine itself, a bulky metallic cylinder built with concentric magnetic rings, mounted on a reinforced base. There were no visible power cables connected to it, no external energy input. When Kessler activated the device, the cylinder began to spin. Slowly at first, then faster, and it did not stop. Minutes passed, then longer. The rotation continued without fluctuation, without any detectable source of fuel or electricity feeding into the system. Kessler explained that his engine was not perpetual motion in the traditional sense. He claimed it was harvesting ambient magnetic fluctuations from the Earth's crust, converting them into continuous mechanical energy. He referred to it as ambient magnetic harvesting, a concept that suggested the planet itself could be used as a limitless energy source. For those in the room, the implications were immediate. If true, this device could redefine energy production entirely. No fuel, no emissions, no dependency on fossil resources. But instead of triggering excitement, the reaction that followed was strangely muted. The television footage recorded that day was never aired. Shortly after the demonstration, the station that filmed it was acquired by a larger network, and the segment featuring Kessler's engine was removed from the broadcast schedule indefinitely. The journalist present at the event later claimed that individuals representing an unnamed government liaison group approached her and requested all her notes, citing concerns related to national energy security. Kessler attempted to legitimize his invention by filing for a patent. It was immediately denied. The official explanation stated that perpetual motion machines are not patentable by law. But Kessler insisted his design did not violate physical laws. He argued that it was simply based on a mechanism science had not yet fully recognized. Soon after, legal pressure began to mount. A major energy consortium accused him of infringing on existing electromagnetic turbine technologies. Lawsuits followed. Funding disappeared. His bank accounts were frozen under investigation. Every path forward seemed to close at once. In a final public statement during a small community forum, Kessler said something that would later echo far beyond that room. "I did not invent a miracle. I revealed a blind spot." Then he vanished. His home in Scarborough was found abandoned. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle. All documentation, blueprints, and components related to his machine were gone. Neighbors later reported seeing unmarked vans parked outside his home during the night, removing large crates just days before his disappearance. Local authorities declined to investigate, stating there was no indication of foul play. When the journalist who witnessed the demonstration tried to follow up, she was told that Kessler had relocated under undisclosed circumstances and that further inquiry was not in the interest of public order. Years later, one of the attendees claimed to still possess a copy of the original video footage, but every attempt to publish it failed. The footage was removed from platforms almost immediately after being uploaded, flagged under copyright claims by unknown entities. Even offline copies were reported to become corrupted. And then, nothing. So what really happened inside that warehouse in 1984? Did Kessler truly discover a way to extract unlimited energy from the Earth's magnetic field? Or did he expose something that threatened an entire global system built on scarcity? Because if his machine worked, even once, then the question is no longer about the science. It's about why the world was never allowed to see it again. Top 5, the sonic cell healer. In 2011, within a small but closely connected medical research circle in Buenos Aires, a biophysicist named Dr. Alejo Barragan introduced a device that sounded more like science fiction than medicine. He claimed it could restore damaged human tissue using nothing but precisely calibrated sound frequencies. No drugs, no surgery, just vibration. At first, many dismissed the idea outright, but what followed was difficult to ignore. Barragan conducted a series of controlled trials in collaboration with a private hospital affiliated with a local university. The early results were not widely published, but those who witnessed them described something extraordinary. Muscle tissue that had been damaged through micro tears began to regenerate at an accelerated rate. Localized burns showed rapid healing responses. The most striking case involved a patient with second-degree burns. After just 3 sessions using Barragan's device, the wound surface reportedly reduced by more than 60%, with no visible scarring and no pharmaceutical intervention. According to Barragan, the mechanism relied on high-resolution acoustic targeting. Specific frequencies were directed at damaged cells, inducing controlled oscillations in cellular membranes. This process, he claimed, accelerated protein synthesis and enhanced mitochondrial repair, effectively allowing the body to heal itself at a dramatically increased speed. If true, the implications were enormous. It could redefine modern medicine entirely. No more invasive procedures. No more long recovery periods. Entire categories of treatment could become obsolete. And that is exactly where things began to shift. Despite the results, no peer-reviewed journal accepted his research. None of the trial data appeared in public medical databases. Within weeks, the university withdrew its support, citing concerns over methodological transparency. Barragan was quietly removed from the research faculty. No official explanation was given beyond vague references to protocol issues. Determined to move forward, he attempted to present his findings at a regenerative medicine symposium in Geneva. But upon arrival, his presentation slot was abruptly canceled. His luggage was seized for what was described as a routine security screening. No further explanation was provided. He returned to Argentina visibly shaken and withdrew from public view. Colleagues who later visited his private laboratory on the outskirts of Tigre noticed something unusual. The lab, once open and collaborative, had become heavily secured. Surveillance cameras monitored the perimeter. Biometric locks controlled access to the interior. It was a drastic change for a man who had previously encouraged open scientific exchange. Something had clearly changed. Then in October 2012, news broke of an accident. Berrigan's car had plunged off a bridge into the Paraná River. The vehicle was recovered. His body was not. A closed casket funeral was held, attended quietly by several government representatives. Official reports attributed the crash to mechanical failure, but mechanics familiar with his vehicle stated that it had been fully serviced just days before the incident. Soon after, rumors began to circulate. Some claimed that elements of Berrigan's research equipment had been relocated to a defense contractor facility north of Cordoba. These reports were never confirmed. However, a declassified Argentine military document released years later briefly referenced a non-invasive biological accelerator before being heavily redacted in subsequent versions. So what did Berrigan really create? Was it simply an experimental medical device that failed under scrutiny? Or did he unlock a method of healing that would have disrupted an entire global system built around long-term treatment and dependency? Because if sound alone could repair the human body, then medicine would no longer be about managing disease. It would be about eliminating it. And that kind of shift doesn't just change healthcare, it changes everything. So the real question is not whether his device worked, it's whether it worked too well. Top 6. The Thought Transfer Physicist. In 1995, inside the Neurophysics Division of the French National Center for Scientific Research, a young experimental physicist named Dr. Lucien Artaud began working on an idea that many initially dismissed as philosophical rather than scientific. He called it non-local information fields, a theory suggesting that under certain conditions, human thoughts could be transmitted directly from one brain to another without any physical connection. At the time, the concept sounded extreme, but Artaud approached it with rigor. He combined models of quantum entanglement with neurochemical resonance, proposing that once thoughts were stabilized into measurable waveforms, they could be transmitted and received in a way similar to radio signals. It was a bold idea, but unlike many speculative theories, Artaud didn't stop at theory. He built an experiment to test it. The setup consisted of 2 isolated chambers, each shielded with layers of Faraday protection to block all known electromagnetic interference. Inside each chamber, a volunteer was placed. One acted as the sender, focusing on a simple geometric shape. The other, the receiver, was instructed to describe whatever image came to mind. The system included full-spectrum EEG monitoring and low-frequency signal emitters designed to synchronize neural patterns between the 2 subjects. What happened next was difficult to explain away. Across dozens of trials, the receiver consistently identified the correct shape at rates far beyond statistical probability. Not occasionally, not randomly, but with a level of accuracy that suggested something real was occurring between the 2 isolated minds. Artaud kept these experiments hidden for over a year. He collected data quietly, without formal oversight, likely aware of how controversial the results would be, but eventually information began to leak through internal channels. And once it did, the response was immediate. He was summoned before an ethics board and accused of conducting unsanctioned human experiments. His funding was revoked, his equipment was confiscated, his work was effectively shut down overnight. Yet despite this, Artaud prepared to present a revised version of his theory at a symposium in Zurich. The paper was titled Cognitive Interference in Non-Local Fields, a more restrained framing of the same idea. It would have been his first official step into the public scientific arena. He never made it there. The night before his scheduled flight, Artaud locked himself inside his research apartment in Toulouse. According to building records, the lock was never disengaged. No one saw him leave. Days later, when authorities forced entry, they found the apartment undisturbed. Food was still warm on the table. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of escape, but his laptop was missing. And on the wall above his workspace, written in blue chalk, were 3 words. It worked. After that, everything connected to him began to disappear. His name was quietly removed from research registries. No official statement was issued by the institution. It was as if he had never existed. Months later, a neuroscience startup in California released a vague announcement about developing synthetic empathy protocols, a concept that bore an unsettling resemblance to Artaud's work. None of the founders acknowledged him. Attempts to contact the company about any connection were met with silence. So what exactly did Ardo prove? Was it a statistical anomaly misunderstood by an ambitious researcher? Or did he demonstrate the first real evidence that human thoughts can move from one mind to another without any physical medium? Because if that is possible, then the implications go far beyond communication. Privacy would no longer exist in the way we understand it. Identity would no longer be fully contained within the individual. Even autonomy itself could be questioned. And maybe that is why his work never made it to Zurich, because some discoveries don't just change science, they change what it means to be human. Top 7, the DNA harmonizer. In 2006, inside a small and highly specialized laboratory on the outskirts of Bern, Switzerland, a geneticist named Dr. Helena Zelina began working on a concept that blurred the boundary between biology and sound. Unlike most researchers in her field, Zelina was not only trained in molecular genetics, but also in acoustic physics. Her work focused on a radical idea that DNA might respond not only to chemical signals, but also to precise patterns of vibration. At first, the theory seemed unconventional, but not entirely impossible. The field of epigenetics had already shown that gene expression could be influenced by environmental factors. Selena simply pushed that idea further. She proposed that specific sound frequencies could interact with cellular structures in a way that triggered genetic responses, almost like a form of biological resonance. Her experiments were conducted under tightly controlled conditions. Using fibroblast cells, she exposed them to carefully calibrated acoustic waves generated by a proprietary transducer system. The frequencies were not random. Each one was tuned to interact with specific cellular processes. After repeated exposure, something unexpected began to happen. Dormant genes started to activate. Genes associated with tissue repair, anti-inflammatory responses, and regenerative functions showed measurable increases in expression. In some cases, the changes were not temporary. They persisted even after the acoustic stimulation stopped. According to Zelina's internal findings, certain frequency patterns appeared to influence telomere behavior, suggesting the possibility of slowing or even partially reversing cellular aging. If true, the implications were staggering. Aging, disease, degeneration, all of it could potentially be addressed not through drugs or surgery, but through precisely tuned sound. It would represent a complete shift in how humanity understands biology, not as a purely chemical system, but as something responsive to frequency and vibration. Zelina did not immediately publish her findings. Instead, she presented them during a closed session in Geneva to a select group of biotech investors and industry figures. According to those present, the atmosphere in the room was tense. Some saw enormous commercial potential. Others were visibly disturbed by what it could mean. Days after that meeting, Zelina cut off all communication. Her laboratory was found abandoned 2 weeks later. Research servers had been wiped. Backup drives stored in a secured safe were missing. Surveillance cameras on the property had been disabled for more than 72 hours prior to the discovery. Despite clear signs of a breach, no formal investigation was pursued. Her academic affiliations were quietly erased. Email accounts returned automated responses. Social profiles disappeared. Colleagues were told she had accepted a private research position overseas, but no institution ever confirmed her presence. Years later, an anonymous scientific paper surfaced briefly online. It described acoustic gene modulation techniques using terminology nearly identical to Zelina's original work. The document was available for only a few hours before being removed. So what really happened to Helena Zelina? Did she uncover a new layer of biology that could allow humans to rewrite their own genetic expression? Or did she step into a space where the line between healing and enhancement became too dangerous to control? Because if DNA can be influenced by sound, then the human body is not just a chemical system. It is something that can be tuned. And if that is true, then the question is no longer whether we can change ourselves. It is who gets to decide how. Top 8, the invisibility field researcher. In 1992, inside a classified optics laboratory hidden within the Mojave Desert, a physicist named Dr. Raymond Collier began working on a concept that had long existed only in speculative theory. Unlike traditional approaches to invisibility, which relied on bending light around an object or using advanced camouflage, Collier pursued something far more unsettling. He aimed to make objects invisible, not by altering the object itself, but by altering how the human brain perceived it. His method focused on manipulating spatial phase differentials, essentially disrupting the way visual information was processed by an observer. Instead of hiding an object from light, his system interfered with perception, creating a field that convinced the brain there was nothing there to see. The breakthrough reportedly occurred during a controlled test involving a containment pod lined with polarized reflective mesh. When exposed to synchronized microwave interference and pulsed electromagnetic feedback, observers in a separate viewing room began to report something strange. The object inside the chamber appeared to distort, then shimmer, and then it was simply gone. But the equipment told a different story. Sensors still detected the object's mass. Thermal readings remained unchanged. Acoustic echoes confirmed its presence. Physically, nothing had disappeared. Yet visually, it was no longer there. It wasn't invisibility in the traditional sense. It was something far more disturbing. It was the removal of perception itself. Collier documented the results and requested extended testing, but instead of approval, he was subjected to a mandatory psychological evaluation. The official conclusion claimed he was experiencing a stress-induced dissociative episode. His security clearance was suspended. The project was reassigned. However, colleagues who reviewed the internal data saw no evidence of instability. What they saw instead was a discovery that challenged the fundamental relationship between observation and reality. 3 months later, Collier disappeared. The facility reported that he had been discharged and returned to his home in Arizona. But when anyone went to verify that, his residence was found empty. His vehicle was still parked outside. Mail had begun to pile up. A neighbor later reported seeing 2 unmarked vans outside the house the night before he vanished. Security footage from the area had been erased. No missing person case was officially filed. Soon after, all references to Collier's research were removed from internal records. Even informal mentions in communications were deleted. Employees who attempted to discuss his work were warned against spreading classified misinformation. The division he worked in was restructured and absorbed into a larger program, one that received a significantly increased budget in the following year. But perhaps the most unsettling detail came later. A maintenance worker at the original test facility reportedly discovered one of Collier's lab coats stored inside a sealed locker. In the pocket was a photograph of the test chamber, completely empty. On the back of the photo, handwritten in uneven script, were the words, "What you see isn't always what is there. What is there isn't always seen." So what exactly did Collier create? Was it simply an experimental optical illusion, misunderstood by those around him? Or did he develop a field capable of altering human perception at a fundamental level? Because if reality can be manipulated not by changing the world, but by changing how we see it, then invisibility is no longer about hiding objects. It's about controlling truth itself. Top 9. The Cold Fusion Revivalist. In 2009, at a little-known alternative energy summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, a reclusive chemist named Dr. Seaman Resnick stepped back into the public eye after years of silence. Once affiliated with the Russian Academy of Sciences, Resnick had spent nearly a decade working in isolation. When he finally spoke, his claim was as bold as it was controversial. He believed he had successfully created a stable cold fusion reaction inside a device small enough to fit on a tabletop. Cold fusion had long been considered one of the most elusive goals in modern science. Previous attempts had been dismissed, ridiculed, or discredited. But Resnick insisted his approach was different. His system used palladium electrodes submerged in heavy water, combined with precise control over thermal and electromagnetic conditions. According to those present at the demonstration, the setup included real-time calorimetric readings, neutron detection equipment, and multiple layers of measurement designed to rule out conventional chemical explanations. The demonstration itself took place behind closed doors. A small metallic chamber produced sustained heat that significantly exceeded the energy being input into the system. Radiation sensors detected low but consistent neutron emissions, a signature typically associated with nuclear reactions. Yet there was no dangerous radiation leakage, no instability, and no visible degradation of the system. Resnick spoke calmly, without theatrics. He did not present it as a miracle. He presented it as a correction. At the end of his talk, he made a statement that left the room in silence. We have always assumed the future of energy must explode, but perhaps it hums instead. What followed was not recognition. It was pressure. Within 48 hours, the conference organizers began receiving legal threats from a consortium of energy investors. The venue canceled all future scientific events. Resnick declined every request for interviews. The printed notes he distributed were later discovered to contain deliberate inaccuracies. He admitted privately to one journalist that he had done this intentionally so that no one could replicate his work too quickly. Shortly after returning home, his apartment was reportedly broken into. Nothing obvious was stolen, but Resnick became convinced he was under surveillance. He withdrew from public life, shut down his research space, and cut off communication with colleagues. Then, in early 2010, a brief obituary appeared in a local newspaper. It stated that Resnick had died of a heart attack in his home. No autopsy report was made public. The funeral was private, attended only by a small number of individuals whose identities were never disclosed. When researchers attempted to locate his prototype, they found almost nothing. The lab showed signs of intense heat damage. Equipment had been removed. No blueprints were recovered. Only fragments remained, as if something had been deliberately erased. In the years that followed, several energy startups quietly filed patents using terminology strikingly similar to Resnick's work. Phrases like lattice-assisted nuclear transmutation and anomalous heat generation began appearing in documents owned by shell corporations. None of them mentioned his name. So what did Resnick really achieve? Was it another failed attempt at a long discredited idea? Or did he briefly unlock a source of clean, nearly limitless energy that could have replaced entire industries overnight? Because if cold fusion had truly been stabilized, even for a moment, it would not just change energy production. It would change the balance of power across the entire world. And maybe that is why his work didn't spark a revolution. Maybe it was never allowed to. Top 10, the time compression experimenter. In 1998, inside a remote experimental facility hidden deep within the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, a physicist named Dr. Istvan Koren began conducting a series of experiments that challenged one of the most fundamental aspects of reality: time itself. His work was not focused on time travel in the traditional sense. He was not trying to move forward or backward through time. Instead, he was attempting something far more subtle and potentially far more dangerous. He wanted to compress time. Koren's theory revolved around the manipulation of localized temporal gradients using synchronized rotating electromagnetic fields combined with scalar wave pulses. Unlike Einstein's model of time dilation, which depends on velocity or gravity, Koren believed time could be altered within a confined space through engineered field conditions. He envisioned creating a sealed environment where time would pass at a different rate compared to the outside world. The experimental chamber, referred to internally as the chronocell, was constructed using a dense lattice of supercooled niobium coils. It was equipped with synchronized atomic clocks placed both inside and outside the chamber to measure any temporal discrepancies. Early tests were conducted using simple objects: a burning candle, a melting ice cube, a mechanical watch. The results were subtle at first, but undeniable. The internal clock began to lag behind the external one. Objects inside the chamber appeared to change at a slightly slower rate. When recordings were played back, the difference became clearer. Time inside the chamber was moving more slowly, not dramatically, but measurably. And with each successive test, the effect became more pronounced. Koren believed he had created what he described as a temporal sink, a localized pocket where time flowed differently. He theorized that with proper calibration, it would be possible for a human subject to enter the chamber and experience only minutes while hours passed outside. Eventually, he decided to test it himself. According to internal records, Koren entered the chamber for what was intended to be a 60-minute experiment from the outside perspective. Inside, he expected to experience only a fraction of that time. The chamber was sealed, monitoring systems were active, everything appeared normal. 60 minutes passed, then more time passed. When technicians finally opened the chamber, they found it completely empty. There were no signs of malfunction, No breaches in the containment system. No biological residue. Security footage confirmed that Corrin had entered the chamber, but none showed him leaving. Inside the system, the data logs had been wiped. The internal camera displayed only static. Authorities were notified, but the response was immediate and controlled. The facility was shut down within days. Personnel were required to sign additional confidentiality agreements. Equipment was dismantled and removed to an undisclosed location. Corrin's family was told that he had died during a classified experiment. No remains were ever recovered. No further details were provided. So what really happened inside that chamber? Did Corrin miscalculate and destroy himself in an unstable field? Or did he succeed in creating a space where time no longer flowed the same way and simply never returned? Because if his experiment worked, then the implications are almost impossible to comprehend. A person could step into a chamber and experience minutes while years pass outside. Entire lifetimes could unfold differently depending on where you stand. And if time itself can be reshaped, then disappearance is no longer limited to space. It becomes something far more unsettling. You don't just vanish from a place, you vanish from a moment. These 10 cases, spread across different countries, different disciplines, and different decades, may seem unrelated at first. But when placed side by side, a pattern begins to emerge. Each scientist pushed beyond accepted boundaries. Each one uncovered something that challenged the foundations of physics, biology, or consciousness itself. And in every case, what followed was not recognition, but disappearance. Not debate, but silence. So the question is no longer whether these discoveries were real. The question is, who decides what knowledge the world is allowed to have? And if breakthroughs can vanish this easily, then how much of reality have we never been allowed to see? If you found this video thought-provoking, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay with us. Because some truths don't disappear. They're just waiting to be found.